The morning sun stretched, golden fingers through the cracks of the old wooden cabin, spilling warm light across the kitchen floor. The air was filled with the soft hum of a woman's voice, gentle, pure, and somehow aching. Her name was Clara May, and though her voice carried the sweetness of spring, her eyes held a quiet sadness that never quite faded. She had been living alone on this forgotten patch of land for nearly 3 years now, ever since the day her father passed and her fiancé rode off to chase. Gold in the mountains, never to return. But she'd learned to fill silence with small comforts. The clatter of bowls, the scent of freshly kneaded bread, and the soft song she hummed from memory. The cabin was her whole world, and she guarded its stillness as fiercely as one guards a secret. The morning had started like any other, a fire crackling in the stove, flour dust floating in the air like drifting snow, and Clara's voice carrying softly over the breeze. She didn't know that her song, drifting through the open window, would reach someone's ears, someone she never expected to see again. Out on the dusty road, a cowboy rode his black stallion at a slow, steady pace. His hat was tilted low against the sun, his vest dusted from the trail, his eyes scanning the horizon like a man with no destination left. His name was Luke Dawson, a ranch hand turned drifter, a man haunted by choices and ghosts of his own. He'd left everything behind years ago, searching for something he couldn't name. And though he'd crossed miles of desert and rivers and wind-bent plains, peace had never found him. But that morning when he heard that voice, that soft, familiar humming carried by the wind, something in his chest stirred. It wasn't just the beauty of it. It was memory. He pulled the reins gently, his horse slowing to a stop. The sound seemed to come from an old cabin at the edge of a wheat field. The melody was one he'd heard before, long ago, back when he was still a young man who believed in promises and forever. He dismounted slowly, boots crunching against dry earth, and for the first time in years, his heartbeat quickened with something other than fear or regret. He stepped closer, drawn by that voice like a moth to light. Inside, Clara pressed the dough with firm, gentle hands, the rhythm of her humming matching her heartbeat. She didn't hear the approaching steps outside the door until the horse snorted softly. Her hands froze, her song stopped mid-note. Her head lifted toward the doorway, eyes narrowing against the glare of sunlight. And there, standing in the golden light, was a silhouette she couldn't mistake. Tall, broad-shouldered, hat in hand. For a moment, the world stopped spinning. "Luke," she whispered, her voice trembling. The cowboy's lips parted, but no words came. The memories flooded back, the letters that went unanswered. The promises broken, the love left behind. He looked older, more weathered, but those eyes, those blue, restless eyes, were still the same. He stepped inside slowly, boots thudding softly against the wooden floor. The smell of bread and sunlight filled the small space, wrapping around them both like something fragile and sacred. "Didn't mean to scare you," he said finally, voice low and rough. "Heard someone singing. Didn't think I'd find an angel in here." Clara blinked back, the sting in her eyes, torn between anger and disbelief. "You shouldn't be here," she said, trying to sound steady, though her heart was anything but. Luke nodded. "You're right, but I reckon I couldn't keep riding once. I heard that song." His gaze flicked toward the table, the flour, the dough, her trembling hands. "You always did hum when you cooked," he said softly. "Said it made the bread rise better." She laughed bitterly, shaking her head. "And you always said you'd come back before the bread turned cold." Silence fell like dust between them, thick and heavy. Outside, the wind rustled the wheat fields, whispering secrets neither of them dared to speak aloud. He looked around the cabin, his eyes tracing the faded curtains, the chipped dishes, the old rocking chair by the fire. "You kept it all the same," he said. Clara turned away. "Some things don't change," she said quietly. "Some things refuse to." Luke took a step closer, hesitant but pulled by something stronger than guilt. "Clara," he began, "I didn't plan to leave you that way. I thought I'd make something of myself, so I could come back with more than dust and dreams. But the gold wasn't what I thought. I lost everything, even myself." She didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the dough, hands tightening around it like she was kneading her pain into the flour. "You could have written," she said finally. You could have said you were alive. He sighed. I did. Twice. Maybe the wind took them before they found you. Her lips trembled. Or maybe you didn't really want to come back. Luke's eyes softened with sorrow. I did. Every mile I rode, I thought of this place, of you standing in this kitchen, humming that song. Tears threatened, but Clara refused to let them fall. You shouldn't have stopped today, she whispered. You should have just kept riding. He stepped closer, voice almost breaking. Maybe I should have. But something told me I needed to see you one last time, even if all you give me is silence. Her heart twisted at his words. She turned to face him, eyes glistening. You can't just ride back into someone's life, Luke, not after all this time. He nodded slowly. I know. But if I could go back, I'd change everything. I'd trade the gold, the miles, the years, just to sit at this table again. For a moment, she saw the boy he used to be. The dreamer who carved their initials into the barn door, who promised forever beneath the summer stars. And though she wanted to stay angry, something inside her softened. She took a deep breath, then whispered, You hungry? He smiled, faintly, relief flickering in his eyes. Starved. She handed him a plate with trembling hands. And as he sat at the table, she went back to her dough, humming again, softly this time, but real. For the first time in years, the cabin didn't feel empty. The air seemed to breathe again. Outside, the sun dipped lower, painting the fields in fire and gold. And as the cowboy ate quietly, stealing glances at the woman he'd once lost, he realized something he hadn't in years, that some roads don't lead away. Some roads lead you home. The next morning dawned quiet, painted in soft shades of rose and amber. The world outside Clara's cabin was still, except for the faint hum of the wind moving through the wheat and the low whicker of Luke's horse tied near the porch. Inside, the air carried the scent of baked bread and brewed coffee. Luke sat at the table, his hat resting beside a tin mug, eyes tracing the familiar cracks in the wooden walls. He hadn't slept much. Every creak of the cabin had carried memories. Every whisper of the night had reminded him of the years lost between them. Clara moved about the kitchen with practiced grace, though her silence spoke louder than any words could. She didn't ask him to leave, but she didn't quite welcome him either. Her walls were strong, built from heartbreak and solitude, and Luke knew he had no right to break them. He watched her pour coffee into 2 cups, her hands steady even when her heart wasn't. You're still here, she said finally, sliding 1 cup toward him without meeting his gaze. Didn't expect you to stay. He smiled faintly, voice rough from the morning chill. Didn't expect the bread to taste that good either. Hard to ride away from that. She shot him a look that could cut through steel. But beneath it, there was something else. Something softer, unwillingly curious. You think a loaf of bread can fix what's been broken for years? She asked. Luke shook his head slowly. No, but maybe it's a start. For a long moment, silence hung heavy between them. The wind pressed against the windows like an old friend trying to listen in. Finally, Clara sighed and sat across from him. You know, there was a time when I'd look down that road every evening, thinking maybe today's the day you'll come riding back. But the seasons changed, Luke. The waiting stopped. His eyes dropped to his coffee. I don't expect you to forgive me, he said quietly. I just needed to see you, to know you're all right. Clara studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. You don't look all right yourself, she murmured. You look like a man running from something. He chuckled without humor. Maybe I am. Maybe I've been running from the same thing since the day I left you. Her brow furrowed. And what's that? He met her gaze, his voice barely above a whisper. Home. The word lingered in the air, soft but powerful. It hit Clara like a memory, of laughter by the river, of shared dreams, whispered under starlight, of promises that once meant forever. But she couldn't let herself fall into nostalgia. She had survived too much loneliness to let one word undo her. I've built a life here, Luke, she said, trying to sound firm. Maybe not the one I dreamed of, but it's mine. I don't need saving. I know, he replied gently. You were always the strong one. She rose from her chair, pacing slowly to the window. Outside, the morning light shimmered across the wheat. You say you lost everything out there. So what now? You planning to stay here till you find something worth losing again? He smiled sadly. I was hoping to find something worth holding on to. Clara turned back toward him, her arms crossed, her eyes searching his face for lies. You really think it's that simple? He shook his head. No, ma'am. I don't think anything between us ever was. For a while they said nothing. The ticking of the old clock filled the space between their hearts. Then Luke stood, walked toward the door, and looked out at the horizon. I saw the old barn still standing, he said. Could use some fixing. If you'd let me, I can lend a hand. Clara hesitated. The barn was her father's pride, now weathered and half collapsed. She'd been meaning to repair it for years, but never found the heart or the help. You don't owe me that, she said quietly. I know, he replied, but maybe I owe it to the man I used to be. And without waiting for permission, he stepped outside and began. For the next few days, the sound of hammering filled the air. Luke worked from sunrise till the shadows stretched long. His shirt damp with sweat, his hands raw. Clara watched from the window, pretending she wasn't watching at all. She'd bring him water at noon, bread in the evening, but their words were few, careful, polite, edged with the weight of things unsaid. Yet with each passing day, something subtle began to shift. One afternoon, as storm clouds gathered in the distance, Luke stood on the ladder fixing the roof. Clara came out with a basket of nails and a stubborn expression. You're doing it wrong, she called out. He grinned. Always the critic. She planted her hands on her hips. You'll have that roof leaking before the first rain hits. He laughed softly, climbing down to stand beside her. Then maybe you should show me how it's done. Without hesitation, she grabbed the hammer from him and climbed up the ladder herself. He watched her, the same grace, the same determination. And for a moment, he forgot the years between them. When she looked down, their eyes met, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Still think you can do everything yourself? He teased. I don't think, she said, hammering the nail with precision. I know. The storm broke not long after. A sudden downpour that sent them both running for shelter, laughing breathlessly as the rain soaked through their clothes. Inside the barn, the air smelled of wet earth and hay. For the first time in years, Clara laughed without bitterness. Luke stood a few feet away, his hair dripping, his smile softer than she remembered. Guess the roof holds, he said. She laughed again. For now. Their laughter faded into quiet. The sound of rain drummed gently on the new boards. Luke's gaze lingered on her, the way her hair clung to her face, the light in her eyes he thought he'd never see again. He took a slow step forward. Clara, he began, his voice trembling, I know I can't change the past, but if there's any way to earn back even a piece of what I lost, I'd spend the rest of my life trying. She looked at him, heart pounding, torn between old wounds and old love. You can't just walk in and ask me to start over, she whispered. I'm not asking, he said softly. I'm hoping. Her eyes glistened, and before she could speak, thunder rolled overhead, drowning out the silence between them. He reached for her hand, slow and uncertain, and for a moment, she didn't pull away. His touch was warm, grounding. It reminded her of summers long gone, of youth, of hope, of everything they'd both lost. But then she stepped back, her voice breaking. You hurt me once, Luke. You left me to face everything alone. I can't go through that again. He nodded, pain flashing in his eyes. Then I'll stay, not to ask for forgiveness, but to prove I deserve it. And he did. Days turned into weeks. Luke repaired the fences, tended the animals, fetched supplies from town. Slowly, the neighbors began to notice. The mysterious cowboy who'd returned to the old May place, working sunup to sundown beside the woman who once swore she'd never love again. Each night, Clara would find herself humming by the stove, unaware that Luke listened quietly from the porch. Her song was different now, not sorrowful, not empty. It carried something fragile and alive. One evening, as the sky turned lavender, she brought out 2 plates of supper. They ate in silence, the kind of silence that no longer hurt. When the stars began to appear, Luke spoke softly. You ever wonder if some things are meant to find their way back? She smiled faintly. Only when they stop running. He chuckled. Then maybe I finally found my road. She turned to him, eyes shimmering in the starlight. Maybe you did. He looked at her then, really looked, and saw not just the woman he'd lost, but the strength she'd become. "Clara May," he said, his voice low and steady. "I've been chasing the world trying to fill the hole you left. But the truth is, I was just trying to get back here." She took a deep breath. "And now that you're here?" He smiled softly. "Now I'd like to stay, if you'll have me." For a long moment she said nothing. Then she reached out, her hand trembling slightly as it found his. "Then stay," she whispered. The night breeze moved gently around them, carrying the scent of wheat and rain. Somewhere in the distance, the old barn creaked, rebuilt, reborn, much like them. And as the stars shone above the quiet prairie, the cowboy who once lost everything finally found home again. Not in gold, not in glory, but in the quiet warmth of a kitchen where a woman hummed as she baked bread, and love rose once more like the morning sun.